Powell, you are up.
Tonight, I finished up my third Disabled Veterans Court trial observation. This case was with the famous Bronze Star and Purple Heart veteran suspected of being involved in a triple homicide near Chattaroy, just out of town. It's obvious that we have a problem in this community with the pharmaceutical drug addiction and bad medical services that throw drugs at veterans instead of spitting on them, as was done in the 1970s. Whether it's the first trial I went to where the soldier lost his family with the overprescribing of psychotropics, the second case dealing with VA benefits trespassing from VA property and written up by the Kathy McMorris Rogers office to the FBI instead of helping the war-injured vet, we need to do better. Another local Purple Heart, Judea Zilmer, was shot in a cop by suicide in 2014. I asked on a politician's Facebook page in the last year what the Purple Heart organization stands for. I'm referencing a need for their support in organizing Purple Heart's transition back to the community. As the county prosecutor, Larry Haskell, stated today, the soldier isn't transitioning to civilian life. Now, we can continue to use this diagnostic manual that's killed tens upon tens of millions of American citizens since its founding in the 1800s, or we can go to the future, which would be factoring out connected to the interactive medical Miranda rights, which trains, assesses and trains individuals in legal protections and products such as advanced medical directives, credentials authentication, resource education, dialect and misinterpretation, skills training and assessment, nutritional assessment, physical exertion routine, organization and hygienics, time management, financial management, motivation and contribution support system, negative influences, environmental conditions, media influence, cultural disagreements, medication management, medical procedure rehab, drug use and illegal drug use, brain injury rehab, and risk assessment at the bottom is now, it will be called Safe Checker for individuals that may be a risk of suicide and homicide. But the idea is to train in these coping skills and the skills that all civilians need to have instead of using this 747-page book to diagnose with dangerous and deadly treatments that cost this country trillions and trillions of dollars, $250+ billion per year, maybe even $500 billion or more if you went to the real cost. So I'm working, and I'd like, veterans groups to move towards helping out their community. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. McDowell. Mr. McGrath?
Tonight, I'm going to talk about alternative methods to the 947-page diagnostic statistical manual that private and public entities in the mental health contractors continually use to detain citizens by use of the police department, ambulance workers, and fire department. Skills development, as you see on the screen, through preventative and rehabilitative services is a superior method to our current dangerous and many times deadly drug treatments that have cost the lives of millions of Americans on an average of 26 years before life expectancy, and debilitating effects that, that leave citizens sometimes jobless and familyless for decades before that death. And so, factoring out will be part of the interactive medical Miranda rights. So every individual in the future will have the ability to communicate with the police department, but also have their legal protections inside the interactive medical Miranda rights, which I'm trying to connect to the county Bill of Rights in the future. And so the first on the checklist in this factoring out is an advanced medical directive and legal protections and products. So individuals sometimes are looked at as mentally ill if they do not know how to represent themselves in courts, or they don't know what medical courts are when they're detained by the department. Within 72 hours, an individual is pretty much put in a Providence back room, and they have all these commissioners and everything standing around, and usually an individual doesn't know how to represent themselves because it's not even a normal court. It's a medical mental health court. And so first you need an advance directive and understanding of the legal process in that factoring out. You need credentials authentication. So anytime you say anything in front of that court or to Providence, they usually write it as schizophrenia or a mental health concern because they don't authenticate any of your credentials, whether it's work experience or anything in your life. There's no ability to do that. They just start writing false reports. And so you also need, an individual needs resource education, whereas if they go homeless in a short amount of time, they need to know where UGM is or other places in the community where they'll find shelter and such. And if they don't, that is looked at as a mental health concern when they're locked down. A dialect misinterpretation is the dialect checker that I'll show you in a second, and skills training and assessment. In order to, skills training and assessment is preventative measures so that individuals can cope through certain circumstances. Nutritional assessment, people all over the county are not getting, sometimes in the summer they get dehydrated or they're donating too much plasma, and that can be a concern with mental health and they can be misdiagnosed. And physical exertion and routine creates when an individual walks for at least 6 miles a day, they can sleep appropriately at night so they won't be misdiagnosed. And organizational and hygienics, time management, financial management, motivation, contribution, support system, negative influence, environmental conditions, media influences that can create, mental health concerns even though they weren't biological. So our outside environment and such. And so that needs to play a factor in cultural disagreements. People all the time have disagreements, especially down here. Everybody's calling everybody mentally ill on Mondays. And so we have problems, and I've lived with 3 different cultures before, and there's always cultural disagreements, and everybody always thinks they're right, especially if they're from a different country and they have different standards of living or traditions. And medication management, all over the city, we have citizens with pseudo-dementia and pseudo-Alzheimer's and kids being drugged up out of control. I talked to a pharmacist the other day who says we're over-drugging our children and we have a huge problem. And then medical procedure and rehab, just like I said, people are over.
Mr. McDowell,
I'm done.
Mr.
Okay,
McDowell.
I'll wait.
Is this your list, or do you have a source for that?
No, this is my list that I
Okay,
created
okay.
that will go in the interactive medical Miranda rights in the future.
Okay, so
and
this
so
is
they'll
the
be
list.
trained in schools and such, so that we don't wrongfully get put out in different situations. And so it's a coping skills and procedures that need to take place before we start using this book. You know, this
So
is the book.
are you saying that law enforcement officers have the
They transfer people
DSM
to-
manual?
Huh?
Law enforcement officers actually use the
Not
diagnostic?
this manual, they're transferring it to the medical contractors who use this manual. And so individuals are being wrongfully written up for this, almost 1,000 pages when citizens all over the county, they need a factoring out system so that they're not wrongfully diagnosed, because after a person's drugged, they're chemically dependent on that pharmaceutical drug when they should have been given a proper assessment. And so this is kind of the assessment that goes in that assessment model that will go in the interactive medical Miranda rights, which everybody will have, or possibly I want the officers to be able to provide that on any detainment to any medical contractor. And then that individual will go through, start reading through and showing that they have independent skills when all these mental health providers get paid to say they don't.
So you're wanting this to be a checklist that an officer uses?
No. The officer will provide that to the individual in the future. And if the individual is detained in Providence, then, they will be able to go through this, but it's more of an electronic system. And so it will be shot to their phone if they don't have this type of stuff. And so then, even though Providence will take away all your electronic devices and such, I want individuals to be able to have those rights in any medical contractor. And also risk assessment, which I say the safe checker, in order to state if an individual is a harm to themselves or others, they need a proper assessment, and citizens aren't getting that. Medical contractors only get paid for incentive for an individual to be ill, so a lot of the time there's a lot of malicious malpractice going on for financial interests, and I'm saying everybody needs an accurate assessment, and that's all I'll say tonight.
Okay, so it's my understanding that you're going to come each month and give us a little bit of a piece of
Yeah,
a
of
big
a bigger
presentation. What I would invite you to try to think a little more clearly about is the extent to which the things you're raising, and I'm not saying you won't need to present it all so we get the context.
Yeah.
But the piece that would be relevant for us is the law enforcement involvement.
The law enforcement involvement is that these tools
Right.
that individuals need to survive will be provided through the phone or on a piece of paper which connects to an internet website. And so
And you're saying law enforcement should give those to him, not the mental health institution?
the institution won't give it because the institution gets paid to not allow any of this information to be provided to a citizen. They only get incentives to detain an individual, sometimes for 3 weeks, and drain their bank accounts. So,
Okay.
and then they get drugged up, and then they can't protect themselves, and they get chemically dependent on those drugs.
Correct
So-
me if,
But Chief Rizzi stated that an officer can at least provide one piece of paper it's not hard for them to print out pages and at least provide the interactive medical Miranda rights in a website to any individual they're detaining, to any medical contractor. So it is possible, I think, but nobody's ever done it.
Okay, thanks.
thank you.
So I can't even see who our other guest is. Do you want to address us? Okay, thanks. It's hard when people.
You know, I personally think what you're doing is great because, you know, if I may, just because, you know, you're correct. Once it goes to a mental health provider, for lack of a better term, without considering, you know, some of the environmental issues and things that are not related to mental health but may cause mental health situations, once they're handed over to the mental health provider, then these things can be brushed under and washed under, and then they're being treated for something that they might not have, or undertreated or improperly treated. Like I told you before, you have a monumental task ahead of you, and I appreciate you just continuing to move forward on this because I think it is very important, and thank you.